Hello and welcome to Poetic Devices. Today we'll be discussing poetic devices, what they are, how they function, and how they could be asked in an exam.
Poetic devices are tools that are used in all types of literature, not just poetry. They are essentially the pillars of writing, as they create an environment for us to better understand what the poet or the writer has said. It creates emotion, it creates rhythm and rhyme, and it supports the overall tone and imagery within the piece of writing. We'll start off with hyperboles. Hyperboles are exaggerative poetic devices. They allow us to understand emphasis on a much greater level. They're actually used in everyday language as well as literature, and it allows us to understand emotion. You'll oftentimes hear your friends say something about how it took forever for them to find the right outfit, or maybe that it took ages to get to school this morning because of the traffic. Are examples of hyperboles, as it didn't actually take us forever to find an outfit, and it didn't actually take forever to get to school because that's just not possible. These are simply ways that we exaggerate things so that the person we're communicating with or the person reading on literature will better understand the extent to what we experienced. Usually when you get an exam question like this, they'll refer you to a line, or they'll just ask you for a simple sentence in a comprehension perhaps, or in a poem. And so the example we've got here is Michelle took ages to get ready for the party. Now you'll always be asked something along the lines of identify or explain or comment. These are all asking more or less the same thing. They want you to state what is the figure of speech or what is the poetic device. Remember that those are usually interchangeable. So for example, in this place, in this exam question, the figure of speech is obviously the hyperbole because it didn't actually take Michelle ages to get ready. So here they say and explain its effectiveness. We're trying to explain why was this appropriate, why was using a hyperbole a good idea here. So we explain here that the hyperbole adds emphasis to how long it took Michelle to get ready, and the idea that it actually did take a really long time. She struggled to get ready because it took her so long. That is the entire point of a hyperbole, is to add emphasis. It adds emphasis and therefore it is effective. Next, we'll start with allusion. Now, allusions allude to a specific idea or concept, and this is the way it's done is through relating it to an important point in history or time or just about anything that is well known. So you can use anything from novels or folk tales, like in this example we have here, Cinderella, or you could be relating it to something like Einstein or perhaps even certain paintings in history like the Mona Lisa. Anything that is well known by the general public, right? Allusions basically just help us better understand the imagery, right? If I had to say to you, oh wow, you're a real Einstein, I'm saying that you're really clever because we know that Einstein is a very clever man or was a very clever man. So therefore we are alluding to the idea, hence the phrase allusion, we are alluding to the idea that you are a very clever person by referring to you as Einstein. You aren't actually Einstein himself, but you share similar characteristics with Einstein. So therefore, I have enhanced the imagery by alluding to the idea or creating allusion. I have enhanced the imagery. Now you, the reader, or you, the listener, better understands what I'm trying to convey. The exam question we're going to look at now is an example of allusion. We start off with hearing line 28 states he had the mind of Einstein but a smile like Mona Lisa. So let's analyze this really quickly. The mind of Einstein, we now know it's an allusion because we are referring to a famous or historical person, right, Einstein, and we are also then later referring to a very historical painting, okay? Those are both being used to create imagery about this person in question, right? He, right? So that's our first step. We're identifying what we've had a look at, what we have been given, right? Now the question says the figure of speech in line 28 is an allusion. We know that to be true, so we agree with that statement. So cool. Moving on. Discuss why it is identified as an allusion and the imagery it creates, right? So first off, we need to start with what is an allusion? What do we know an allusion to be? An allusion is when we are referring, using referential thinking to associate a very well-known idea with a subject. So here we say the answer will go as follows. The line references Einstein and Mona Lisa. Both are historical figures used to better understand the boy, right? So the boy in question, or he in question, we now know is very clever, but is also very timid, because if you think about the Mona Lisa, you will remember that she isn't smiling broadly, she isn't smiling exaggeratively, she has quite a calm and timid smile. But Einstein, as you'll also know, is a very clever man. So both those ideas have played together to create an image of this boy. The imagery created by Einstein implies the boy is clever, cool, happy. We explain why, because Einstein is known for his intelligence, and the Mona Lisa implies he does not smile with enthusiasm, just as the painting has a faint smile. So that is how you would analyze a question, especially if they've given you the line. You first stop and just analyze the line that has been given to you before attempting to answer any questions. Before even reading the question, analyze what you've been given, have your own thoughts and opinions sorted, and then move forward with answering the question. Now we'll be looking at litotes. Although the term litotes ends in an S, it is a singular noun, so please be aware of that. So first, what is a litotes? Let's just understand the basics. So a litotes is a figure of speech and a poetic device that emphasizes one idea through the negative of that idea. This is a very complicated way of understanding it, and although the definition on paper doesn't seem to make a lot of sense, once we hear the examples, you find that you actually use them very often in everyday language, right? So litotes often and most of the time include double negatives that create even more effect for us to better understand something. So if we look at these examples, we'll see that we'll say something along the lines of, it was not a bad day's work, right? Not and bad are both negatives, but when we put them together, we know that it equals a positive, right? So not a bad day's work means it was actually a good day's work. It wasn't a bad day's work. That's what we're saying, right? If we say something like, it's not my first rodeo, this isn't a double negative because we only have one negative, but that negative in itself is implying that this is more, well, first, this isn't my first rodeo is actually a metaphor, which implies experience. So when we put not in there, we know that this person has experience. This person has rodeoed a few times. Irony is mostly used for humor. For example, a teacher who doesn't like children would be ironic because naturally we expect a teacher who chose to become a teacher to enjoy spending time with children. Or, for example, a butcher who is a vegetarian is also ironic because irony is essentially the idea that we, the reader, or we, the audience, we expect one idea. But in the long run, we are exposed to a very different idea, and that leaves us feeling almost humorous. This is why it's often used to create humor, right? So, for example, if we refer back to the butcher, we expect a butcher who works with meat to enjoy eating meat. However, when we find out a butcher that is vegetarian, we understand that it's irony because we don't expect someone who works in a meat industry, who works with meat, to actually not eat it and to prefer to eat vegetables. This is an unexpected turn of events. So irony is essentially used for comedic purposes, but it's used in a way that we expect one idea and later on we are faced with a completely different understanding. Now, satire is very similar to irony, but the major difference here is that where irony can be taken on surface value and can be humorous, satire tends to be a little bit more serious. Satire likes to force the reader to think, right? It usually appears funny on the surface, just like irony, but if you look at it a little bit more, if you look at it a bit closer and you think about it more, you'll realize that it is a lot more important. For example, if we have a look at the planet who's wearing a little shirt that says I am stupid, and that shirt is pointing at mankind. On the surface, it's kind of funny. It's like, oh wow, well, you wouldn't expect Earth to hate human beings because, well, we live on it, right? So it's kind of funny. But if you look at it on a deeper level, you'll see that it speaks to the environmental crisis. It speaks to the fact that the planet is suffering under human behavior. So this is satirical because although on surface value it is humorous and it doesn't seem harmful, on closer inspection it has a much deeper meaning and allows us to much better understand the world around us. A paradox is a statement or idea that doesn't appear logical on the surface, similarly to satire. However, a paradox doesn't make sense at all, where in satire it does make sense. The paradox forces you to think by not making sense, because naturally we as people attempt to reason what we're reading. So when we look at a paradox and it doesn't appear to be reasonable, we think about it more and more, and this allows us to come to deeper understandings. If we look at the example here, it says less is more. Less is not literally more, because that's not possible. You can't have less of something and equally have more of it as well. But this statement, this paradox, refers to simplicity and the importance of simplicity. And it implies that less confusion or fewer troubles comes with saying less or doing less or being less. The idea on the surface doesn't seem to make sense, but when we think about it with more depth, we are able to understand the importance of the phrase in a whole. Synecdoches are a part of speech or a poetic device that uses a part of an idea to explain a whole idea. For example, if we look at the slide, we'll see the example says America won the swimming competition. Now, we know logically that the whole of America, every person in America did not win the swimming competition, because we can't put every American from America into a swimming pool and force him to swim a swimming competition. But we know, due to referential thinking, we know that when we are using the term America, we're using it vaguely. We're actually not implying the whole of America, we're implying the swimming team, the American swimming team. So when we say America won the swimming competition, what we're really trying to say is that the American swimming team won the swimming competition, right? So this is another one of those referential thinking poetic devices. This specifically allows the writer to place emphasis on particular sections of the statement. Now we're looking at metonymy. Metonymy and synecdoche go hand in hand with each other. They're like sisters, right? Metonymy is a figure of speech that makes use of related words or phrases instead of an entire concept. So here we would use words that are related and not words that explain, and that not words that are a whole. Basically, metonymy is when we take words that have the same idea and we use them sort of interchangeably. They mean the same thing, so we can swap them in and out, right? So let's look at the example to explain this better, to better understand it, because it seems confusing when we just look at the definition, right? The example goes, after the war, Scotland seized the throne, okay? The whole of Scotland did not literally go up to the throne and go, this is my throne now. What we're actually saying here by Scotland seized the throne, the term the throne, is implying to the entire kingdom. After the war, Scotland seized the entire kingdom. So when we use a phrase of metonymy, what we're actually implying is not one entire whole, we're actually referring to things a little bit more vaguely. So the throne implying to the whole kingdom. And another example of this, a more common example, would be something like saying nice wheels, right? This term, we all know, is referring to someone having a nice car. We aren't referring to them having literally nice wheels. We aren't saying, wow, those are some really fancy tires you've got there. We're saying you've got a really good looking car, right? So the wheels of the car are not specifically being complemented. The entire car is being complemented. But by using just the part of the wheels, we are using another form of referential thinking to explain that the whole car, like the same way we use the throne to explain the entire kingdom, we're using the wheels to explain the entire car. I have included this slide just so that we can have a look at the comparison of synecdoche and metonymy. Like I said, they are kind of like sisters, and think of them as sisters, not twins. They are not the same thing. They are very similar, but they're not the same thing. They do work hand in hand though. So for metonymy, we're making more general statements. Things like, remember the throne? The throne are very vague, but we're talking about the general idea of the kingdom. Whereas synecdoche, we're making very specific commentary on very specific things. Let me just find that example for us so we can have a look at it again. For example, America, we're talking specifically, remember the American swimming team, we're talking specifically about the American swimming team by referring to America. But when we look at metonymy, we're using a whole idea to imply another thing. They don't even have to be directly related. So we look at the throne to imply the entire kingdom, whereas synecdoche, we're looking at a small part, like just America, to explain a whole idea of the American swimming team. So just remember that when you're looking at metonymy and synecdoche, they are sisters, not twins. Before we have a look at what an extended metaphor is, let's just quickly recap what a metaphor itself is. A metaphor is when we are talking about one thing by directly referring or mentioning another, right? It creates clarity and identifies some similarities or often points out differences between the two ideas, all right? So now we have an understanding of what a metaphor is. So when I say an extended metaphor, what I'm actually trying to say is one metaphor, one idea, right? But it continues. That imagery created from that single metaphor continues over several lines in a poem or in any form of literature. So if we look at the little table I've got there in the corner for us, we'll see a normal metaphor would say the sea is a playful cat, right? We're identifying the similarities between the sea and the cat, and you create that imagery of the sea being cat-like, being playful, right? But an extended metaphor will say the sea is a playful cat. It licks and paws the beach. On sunny days, it lies calmly with its belly to the sun. Those are still pointing out the similarities. It's still behaving like a metaphor, doing exactly the same job. It's just doing it over a few lines. It's creating a little bit more depth. It creates more ideas, and but just remember that the key idea is that it remains with one metaphor, but the same metaphor is extending itself over multiple lines to create more depth and more understanding and enhancing the imagery overall. I hope by the end of all of the lessons and all the PowerPoints we've gone through today that you are understanding to the best of your abilities and that you have stayed with me throughout all the slideshows. Have a wonderful day, and I will see you in the next PowerPoint.